Hello, hello. Welcome, Michael. Lovely to see you here at the lounge.
Thanks for having me on,
Welcome
Caroline.
to Awesome. So, thanks again, all our listeners joining back with us this evening. Tonight, we are very lucky to have BT Futures Property Fund Head Project Manager Michael Kelly. So, welcome to the lounge, Michael.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who don't know me, I am Carolyn McDonald. I am the CEO at Black Tie, who is the developers and host of the BT Asset Hub. So BT Futures is one of the first funds that has listed onto the Asset Hub. So very excited tonight to dig a little deeper into BT Futures, find out a little bit about its journey and how it got here, and also the great role that Michael plays, I guess, the great role that Michael has there at the fund. Michael, one of the things I love to do and have all our guests is talk about their history. And I guess for us, you've had a massive, long journey in real estate, construction. Would you mind just telling our listeners a bit about where it all started and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, Caroline. In a nutshell, I started out back in the day as an electrician, and I started in construction at New Parliament House in Canberra, where I did my apprenticeship, and I was there for about 6 years. I worked on 27 buildings in the Australian Defence Force Academy and many other development sites in Canberra, Sydney, and Brisbane over the years. I was working in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and building automation. I started buying real estate for myself. I did some joint ventures and a couple of DAs and buy, renovate, and flip strategies, all successfully. The upshot is I worked in construction for many, many years, and I've learned a lot about construction. And in these changing times, there's always more to learn with more regulation, which I enjoy. My real estate career began in 1997. Whilst I was in San Francisco, I met a guy called Chuck.
And Chuck, as you do in the States.
As you do, mate, as you do. And he taught me what a buyer's agent was, because I've never heard of one in Australia.
Of course.
And then he also taught me how to be a buyer's agent, which was great. So I came back to Australia, and I was the first buyer's agent in Australia back in 1997.
Wow.
I've purchased many owner-occupier homes and investment properties in the eastern suburbs of Sydney for my clients. I've also purchased many off-the-plan properties in Brisbane over the past 6 years, and all my clients over the past 25 years have all done very well. I also wrote a book in 2009 with many updates over the years, and the strategy in the book still works today. I was also featured in a chapter of another real estate book, which was a bestseller. And over the past years, I've purchased residual apartment stock in bulk for large funds and development sites for large developers. So to sum it all up, Caroline, I've had about 40 years experience working in construction and real estate both combined, which brings me to today, where I've been working with and for you over the past few years to buy some great assets in the BT Futures Fund. And let me say, Caroline, these large transactions can take anywhere from 6 months to a year and up to 2 years in some cases. A lot of hard work goes into buying these assets, and a lot of stress, I might add, which you know oh so well.
Absolutely. As we said, that this BT Futures Fund was really a combined effort from all of our teams, our real estate teams, our technical teams, and trying to take a fund on a journey like we have had to is been very long. So you've had the project management side, other teams have had the compliance side, and then obviously we've got the tech teams. Trying to do something that is new and something that's going to be compliant in this country, for the very first time, has been upwards of nearly 5 years, from start to finish. Obviously, your project times for the actual assets, have really been probably the last 18 months, would you say?
Yeah, longer.
Yep. Yeah, even longer. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important, Mike, obviously, because, neither of us are financial advisors. Nope. So it's important that we let everyone who's listening know that, whatever Mike and I are deep diving into and what we're talking about, before you look at the property fund or any of the funds on the Asset Hub, you need to get your own financial advice. So we're not giving any financial advice here. This is very much just a deep dive into some of the strategies that the fund has been able to accomplish, how the project management team under Mike, goes in and assesses each asset. The fund at this point in time, Mike, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, has 5 contracted assets that have been worked out over the period of time. And Mike will deep dive a little bit more into sort of, I guess, how you get to these assets. But one of the things I wanted to start with is talking about the, I guess, the benefits and why have we gone to a tokenized model outside of a traditional fund model. So everybody knows, how property funds have worked. They've been around for generations. Historically, they've been hard to get into, for, wholesale investors only. Once you're into them, you're generally locked in for a certain period of time. To get out of these funds, to sell your shares in a fund often can take quite a bit of time. There might be some buyback strategies by the fund manager behind them. There's lots of paperwork, lots of paper trails. So obviously, the way things in the world is moving right now, a lot of these things need to become more fluid because the world is changing so fast. So real estate being tokenized, I guess, is one of those aspects of things that everyone's trying to change in the world so it can start to keep pace with the demands of life, right? So, investors like our parents, they were quite content to have that timeline of, finding an accountant or a financial advisor, then getting their fund recommended. They would allow the financial advisor to get everything sorted for them, and then they would just hope the investment's doing well at the end of the day. And I know my kids and a lot of the other generations now, they're more wanting to really see the day-to-day of what is happening, of those investments. They want to be able to jump in when they want to. They want to be able to get out when they want to. So tokenizing, is sort of aimed at, as a picture of trying to get that model to work. So that's why funds like BT Futures and like a whole heap of other funds that are listing onto the Asset Hub are moving towards tokenization. Now, it's important to note that there are a heap of tokenization platforms on a global basis. Each country's got their own compliance. Okay, our BT Futures is working within Australian compliance. So when we took BT Futures on this journey, there was a lot of things we had to consider because some of the regulations hadn't been tried and tested before. Each state has different regulations for transfer duties. So, there's a lot of compliance work behind know your client, know your business, all the ID and that we have to do in this country. So the BT Asset Hub platform is about digitizing that whole process and making it easier for the investor to have a look at what investments are on offer, apply to invest and sell. Okay. And in the future, obviously trade. Okay. So that's the whole purpose, I guess, behind tokenizing a property fund and what BT Futures set out to do. One of the other things that we should probably highlight with BT Futures is it's ring fenced because of its compliance to Australian investors only. Okay. That particular fund is set up that way. It's set up that way because Australian regulation has rules in regards to foreign investment. Okay, so as a fund manager, when they're preparing their funds in Australia, they have to consider, will their fund be open to foreign investment or not? Okay, so many of the other funds on the Asset Hub are open to foreign investment, but BT Futures is not. Okay, and it was designed that way to really give Australians a helping hand in their first real estate investment. And also in the self-managed super fund space. So that's part of the whole BT Futures strategy. So, and, we're deep diving into that particular fund. So everything that we're talking about today is in regards to BT Futures. So one of the other things about BT Futures is its returns, okay, which I think is always one of the most important things for any fund. Because it's completed property in this, there are rental returns. So one of the great things about BT Futures is that you don't have to wait for your investment before it starts earning returns because BT only buys completed residential stock. Okay, so that's one of the key things of that fund. And the other thing BT does is it's only targeting assets in high growth corridors. So it's looking at two things. One is the rental returns, and the second is how that asset is going to appreciate for the investor. So 2 highlights for the investment strategy there for BT Futures. The other big thing about BT that I love to go through is that it's a fund that's maturing in 3 phases. Okay, so it is phase 1 wholesale, phase 2 it's open wholesale, which means it can start to take more than 20 investors. And then the journey of BT is that it will go retail, and it chose that path because BT really wanted to be able to open the world for everyday investors. Okay, so we're opening up and allowing investors that aren't classified as wholesale, okay, into BT Futures, and that journey really wanted to take place. The team decided it was really important as part of the investment strategy that Australian retail investors had an opportunity to benefit from this fund, and that's why it went on that journey. So that was a huge mouthful, right, Mike? So I'm gonna ask you a little bit now. Now, one of the things on this journey and what your team is charged with is finding assets for BT that fit the fund's investment strategy, the fund's mandate, and there's quite a bit of stuff that you have to go through, right?
There is, yep.
Okay, so can you maybe take us through, as much as you can, what are the key things that you're looking for when you are filtering through assets that are proposed to be acquired by this fund?
Sure. We're buying assets in great locations, as we mentioned. For example, walking distance to trains, buses and public transport, large shopping centres like Westfields, cafes and restaurants. These factors are what drives potential capital growth over time. And we've all heard of location, right?
Yeah.
We look for the best floor plans in the development and we discard odd-shaped apartments. We look for certain sizes in the floor plans for the apartment. For example, a 1-bedder being 50 square metres and above, a 2-bedder from 70 square metres and above, and over 95 square metres for a 3-bedder. It also depends on the floor plan. Sometimes they can be a bit smaller if there's a great floor plan with no wasted space. We make sure the gross and net rental returns meet the fund's mandate. If there is potential for capital growth or uplift on the property, we look for that as well. We make sure the amenities, gym, pool, spa, saunas, etc., in great working shape, which will increase rental returns. Apartments that have views to help with future potential capital growth. We'll do inspections of the apartments for defects and have them fixed before we settle or within 3 months of settlement. On assessing a potential asset, we can walk away with up to well over 1,500 photos or more of the asset. And all compliance checks like occupational certificate, etc., checked by the solicitors to make sure it is a sound asset we are purchasing.
Okay, so that's quite a lot to go through. Now, one of the things that we talk about with BT, so everything that you check on these assets is built. So BT is not acquiring anything that's under construction.
Nope.
There's no construction risk, right?
No construction risk at all, no.
Okay, all right, great. And as we mentioned, because they're built, rental income from day one.
Yep.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about too with these assets, you talk about the mandate. So we understand the fund has a particular mandate, and as part of what you're tasked to do, you can't. Can you deviate from that mandate if something really pops and says, this is a great investment? I mean, how much leeway do you have?
Not a lot. It depends on the decisions of the people that make those decisions. So I just report to them, and they make those decisions. So they don't differ too far from the mandate, no.
So they're pretty strict, aren't they?
Yeah, very strict. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, out of the last 18 months or so, we said the fund's got 5 contracted assets. How many would you have looked at to narrow down these particular 5?
Of residual apartments and or whole building apartments, probably 40 to 50.
Okay. So it's quite a lot. And even, I guess, for you to look at them, they've already had to meet some form of mandate already.
Yeah,
And then these other ones you've decided didn't tick some boxes.
correct. We go through all the spreadsheets of all the numbers. Valuations are very important, so it can take us a couple of weeks just to arrive at a decision whether it's worth pursuing or not.
Yep.
Then valuations come into play. So a lot of these assets we don't go after because the vendors or the developers, they want too much for their properties and they're not prepared to meet the market value. So we also do checks with valuers to make sure where we're at. And if it doesn't tick all the boxes, then we have to walk away. So, if we're working on 5 at the moment that are very good, then it's taken probably a couple of years to nail those down. So there's 40 or 50 plus for sure.
Yeah, wow. It's a lot of effort. But I guess it's really important, right? Because this is the investment strategy of the fund and you're representing investors.
Correct.
So, things on a compliance level, if the fund has an investment strategy and a mandate, it has to be super strict. And, it's great to hear that your project team and you go through so much just to make sure that those, those I's are dotted and those T's are crossed.
We have to do all of those, and even then, when you get into due diligence, etc., it's a lot of time and a lot of work to tick all the boxes.
I'm glad it's you, not me.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of inspections, a lot of work, a lot of documentation as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk about as well, and I missed mentioning it, we were talking about the fund's investment strategy, but the key thing for people looking to invest into the fund is that, if they've got 50 grand, they've got 100 grand, traditionally, if I've got that, say I'm a first time investor and I've got that in my bank account, and I'm looking to buy a property, what I'm looking at is I've got to find a property, one, that I can afford. Okay. 2, I've got to then try and get a bank loan to cover the rest.
Correct.
I've got to hope that it's tenanted and that I'm either trying to break even at least because negative gearing, it's pretty hard to get lending on negative gearing now, right?
Yeah, it is.
So when I'm looking at it, if I'm an investor, I'm looking at this fund now and I've got my 50 or 100 grand, I can actually go and buy into these assets that you have basically put through the miller. We know they're top of the line assets, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
I've got confidence. Okay, that they've all been put through. They've passed on this. We know that there's the target of 8% rental return. They're in high growth corridors.
Correct.
And I can go in. I'm not worried about the tenants because it's not something I have to deal with. That's the fund's issue. I don't have to get a bank loan. Okay, I can just put in and buy my share of these really great assets and just be confident that at least I'm into the Australian property market, which for first-time investors is pretty hard to get into on your own.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I really enjoy the fact that, being able to have the flexibility, I guess, what we've been able to create there for investors. When we're talking about if you are you're putting in that investment versus trying to manage this on your own, right? Because we grew up in that era where our parents always told us, save for your deposit.
That's right.
Your house, go and get your investment property, get a loan. You start your debt cycle.
Yeah.
And what we've when we grew up, there was a certain, I guess, amount of money we had to save to be able to do that. But now trying to save for a deposit for your 20, 25-year-old, is practically impossible, right? So they have to be years and years of saving. And while they're saving, their money's not earning for them outside of a bit of bank interest.
Correct.
So I think, it's great that there's this potential for them to be able to get their dual income started and dip their toe into the property market.
Absolutely.
One of the other things too was if we talked about self-managed super fund, right? We talk a lot about the first-time investor because we know there's just so many in Australia, but self-managed super funds too, right?
Yep.
If I'm a self-managed super fund, I've got 300 grand and I'm going to want to invest that into property. it's quite a complicated scenario right now. Okay, you've got to set up a bear trust for each property.
Correct.
You've then got to find a lender. There's not many lenders for self-managed super funds.
There's only three, as I know.
Yeah, most of them are capped, so you
Yep.
can only lend 50, 60%, of the property.
Yeah.
And again, you're going through that. I mean, I've seen self-managed super funds go through this on a regular basis. That's really a 3-month process.
Absolutely.
Right, from start to finish for these guys. That's if they've found the property and they need to do everything else. So again, if you look at self-managed super funds, and we've got heaps in Australia, versus investing 300 grand into this rather than going through and dealing with all that as well on their own, it's a no-brainer.
Absolutely, yeah. There's many good reasons why you should be buying into a fund. You don't pay stamp duty or solicitor's fees, building and pest inspections, and any costs relating to buying the property. You don't pay those costs when you're buying into the BT Futures Fund. You get rental returns from day one, potential capital growth, as you would when you buy your own investment property. We look at assets with uplift potential, which is great. Low investment entry point to buy into the BT Futures Fund compared to needing a big deposit, as you mentioned, to buy an investment property. No debt required to buy into the fund. You don't need a loan, like you mentioned. And buying into the fund is faster than buying an investment property. You mentioned a few months to buy an investment property. I've seen people come to me after 12 months and say, I've just had enough. Find me an investment property. So it is a big journey to buy an investment property, whereas you can just go straight into the fund tomorrow if you had the money ready to go. You said, if you had $100,000, 50,000 sitting in the bank ready to go or more. And the great thing also I find, Caroline, with the fund is the fund has liquidity, which means you can sell today, for example, and get your money straight away. The typical cycle and some people might know that are watching might not know, to sell your property by the time you list an agent can take 3 to 4 months before you even get it sold and you get your money. And if there's a profit, and if it doesn't sell, it can take up to 12 months. Whereas in the fund, you can sell straight away. So there's many advantages, Caroline, that I love about the fund for the people buying into the fund.
Yeah. Yeah, we could probably sit here all day talking about that, couldn't we?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to, again, pick your brains a bit. Just walk me through the example of what happens when the first time an asset comes to you versus to everything that you and the team need to do to get it to that stage where it actually goes up to the investment committee for them to, start their, acquisition process. So just take us through the amount of, what are your steps?
All right. By the time we find an asset, we go through it with a fine-tooth comb. We get an Excel spreadsheet of all the apartments that we're looking to buy, whether it be, I've had spreadsheets come across our desk up to $300 million worth of residual stock. So we break that down, what meets the mandate of the fund. It comes down to what are we paying price per square metre. We look at all of that. We look at the rental return, the net rental return, and the gross rental return that the fund needs to achieve. Once we go through all that, and that can take up to a couple of weeks because we've got to do a lot of research to get to a point to say, okay, this is something that we like. All right. Then I've got to go out and we go and do the inspections of the property. We get a walkthrough, take lots of photos on that. Then by the time we compile all that information, we've been out and we've touched and felt everything. We like the floor plans. We go through a lot of floor plans as well because that's very important on potential capital growth. Then we compile it all together and then send it up for asset for checking of it all on a higher level. And then they come back with a yes or no. And then if it's a yes, we move into what's called due diligence, heads of agreements, due diligence, letters of purchases, and then we go into due diligence. We do a lot of inspections of the properties for defects, where we'll either get them fixed if there's any defects prior to settlement or within the first 3 months of settlement. And then they'll usually be rented out, which is fantastic. So we just then take over, do the settlement, and away we go. It's put it into the fund and people have straight access to it.
Yeah, that's amazing. A lot of work on that goes in there.
There's a lot of that.
You know, we've seen a lot. Obviously, all the experts' reports have got to come through as well. So,
Correct.
outside of all the work that your group does, there's the valuation reports.
Correct.
Obviously, all the compliance reports, so building and pest, the ones that you've mentioned. Insurances for the fund, really important.
Very important.
Obviously, assets, you've got to be fully insured.
Yes.
And you know, we talk about some of that uplift potential. So I guess figuring out whether that uplift, when it can be actioned, what the returns are going to be, you know, all of that from what I've seen, you know, is part and parcel of how everyone works out their acquisition price.
Yep.
So
Correct.
there's a huge amount of work that goes into it. So as I said, I admire you guys. I don't know how you pour over all of that information for such an extended period of time.
As I mentioned, it's anywhere from 6 months to a year to 2 years on some projects.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But
so we're going to have one of the things, Mike, I forgot to mention at the beginning, because we've started to get a few questions that popped up. So we're going to have a Q&A. So if anyone has some questions, please put them in the chat now. And Mike, I've got another question for you that I just wanted to run through a little bit for you. So we touched on briefly before. There's 5 major assets in there at the moment. So there's 2 7-apartment hotels, about 160 apartments, maybe more. Don't quote me. I'm just, you know, estimating on that one.
Correct.
We talked about that you've probably looked at about 400 or so apartments to really focus on that in the last 2 years. So
I've looked. No, sorry, just a quick one. I've looked at 40 to 50 different assets of residual stock.
Batches.
Different batches. So it's a lot.
So we talked about some of the reasons why, on a high level, that those assets were passed in. Can you deep dive a little bit for us? You know, what's the key reason some of these don't make the cut?
Okay, some the reasons are the main one is the vendor's expectations on price. So the developers or the asset owner, the vendor, will have a certain price in their mind. Generally, I find most of it is over what's called valuation. So it's a higher price that they want, that we're prepared to pay, and that the valuers are prepared to back. So that's probably the main one. Other ones are the floor plans, which are really, really important. There's lots of really odd-shaped floor plans that just don't drive your capital growth over time. So I really, you know, working in construction for many, many years, I really know what's a good floor plan. So we go through them with a fine-tooth comb. I remember doing one where we worked through 8 different lots of floor plans just to arrive at a number where we were happy to purchase. So that took 9 months, but we got there. So they're the main reasons. And we also find out they're in a bit of trouble with funding. So we might just let that one go as well. And we'll leave that, and just like to work with good people, good developers, good asset owners.
Yeah, it's important too, isn't it? Because there really is a long-term relationship. So, you know, often the fund, I guess, isn't buying the vendors out. It might be a certain batch. So, you know, the relationship, you know, still remains. And so dealing and working with quality construction groups is really important for the fund as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very high quality we look for.
Yeah. So, Mike, there's a bit of a question here. So we're just going to move out to some of these questions. So one of the things there is expressing interest. So what is the time frame we're looking from expression of interest to being in the fund currently? I think that's, from what I'm understanding, that question is when you express your interest to invest in the fund, there is the investment manager that needs to approve that expression of interest. Now, the investment manager is looking at where the investor is coming from. So as I said, BT Futures is only able to accept Australian investors. So if you're an international and you're applying to invest, the investment manager will reach out to you and let you know, unfortunately, they can't accept your investment, but there are plenty of other investments on the Asset Hub that do accept foreign investment. If you are an Australian resident, the investment manager would go through your KYC documents that you submitted via the Asset Hub, ask any particular questions, and that process then is normally approved within 24 to 48 hours. And then at that point in time, your address is whitelisted, and then you can proceed with your investment. So the average investment time from when you apply to invest to when you do your investment is about 24 to 48 hours, depending on, obviously, whether as an investor you are ready. Okay, so some investors apply to invest and then they've got to get themselves ready, either they're moving their money or doing whatever they're doing. But on a transactional level speaking, the system and the investment manager can manage it through on a 24 to 48 hour basis. So I hope I answered that question for you, Mughal. And one of the other questions we've got here is strict controls for allowing universal investment and knowing what you will get. So I'm going to take universal as global. So one of the answers to that is, as I mentioned before, with BT Futures. And if you are foreign to Australia, you probably don't realise, but Australia has a foreign investment tax, and we call it FIRB. So it means that the government charges an extra levy if the investor is coming in offshore. So one of the things that in a fund, if you have a mix of investors that are from offshore and from Australia, it means the whole fund is having to pay FIRB. Okay, so that's why BT Futures is ring-fenced to domestic investment only, because there are other funds that are accepting foreign investment. A lot of them are construction funds because their margins are higher. Because BT Futures is purchasing completed stock, it's got some very strict controls to be able to deliver its return to its investors, and that's why it's ring-fenced there. So if you're talking about global investment and knowing what you'll get, the best thing you've got on your side is any fund that is listed on the BT Futures, on the Asset Hub, has its own investment manager, and they are AFSL holders. So one of the things the BT Asset Hub has done is that it requires every fund that's listed to have its own investment manager. Okay, so they're all different investment managers holding their required licenses. And that gives you an extra level of protection, knowing if you are from another country and you are deciding to invest into one of the funds on the Asset Hub, they're all regulated schemes with their own investment manager. So when it comes to investment, I would say that Australia is probably one of the strictest, which is why there are not many tokenized asset platforms here, because it's very tough compliance-wise. So, one of the key things too with the Asset Hub is because we've chosen this really tough compliance journey, it allows us to stand by and think that we're pretty much gold standard on what we've done with compliance and investor protection.
Correct.
But again, this is my passion, and I could go on forever about all of this. So I hope I've answered your question in regards to the strict controls for foreign investment. Mike, did I miss anything? Maybe
you nailed it. You nailed it. You did very well. Thank you.
Awesome. So I hope if you've got any more questions, just pop them in the chat. Mike, was there anything else that you wanted to have a bit of a talk to the audience about, or let listeners know that we might not have had a chat about already?
No, I'm really good. Thanks. I've put out a lot of information forward. I hope it answered people's questions that they had in their head. But it's a very exciting future for a lot of people around Australia. that can now get in and buy and have their own real estate.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, just so you know too, we have plans to have Mike back. He is going to take a deep dive on each asset to really walk through each particular asset on its own session to sort of really explain to the investors what was the journey for the BT Futures acquiring that asset, what's the plans for that asset, what is that asset currently returning, and we look forward to some of those sessions. So Mike, thanks for being here. Much appreciated for your time.
No, I appreciate being here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Anytime. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. See you soon.